Hello, we're going to start now. The room is filling up quickly. I'm starting now because I am utterly delighted and we have a lot to cover today. To welcome you all and to say thank you all for joining us today, this snowy day in New York City, but welcome from wherever you are in the world. My name is Jane Debevoise, and I'm the chair of Asia Art Archive in America, as well as the co-chair of Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, our Hong Kong-based mothership. Asia Art Archive in America is a nonprofit organization based in Brooklyn. We are a library or a reading room here, an archive, and a programming platform that aims to collect, preserve, and make accessible information focused on what we call recent art from and of Asia. Today, Asia Art Archive is thrilled to be partnering with another New York-based nonprofit organization that we have long admired. Triple Canopy is the name of the organization, and they will be the co-presenters of this program today. The program is called Miasma, Plants and Export Paintings, and it's a virtual screening of recent works by the artist and filmmaker, Bo Wang, or Wang Bo. This is actually the second time that Asia Art Archive has shown Bo's work. The first was actually a decade ago in 2019 when he gave a fascinating presentation at our old location. We have now moved. We're moved to a new location as of November last year, 2021. And his presentation was co-organized by art apologist and Michelle Lim. I think Michelle now lives or is based in Singapore. So we're really excited to see what you have been doing in the interim 10 years. Now I'd like to hand over the Zoom screen to the Triple Canopy senior editor and Asia Art Archive in America Leadership Camp alum, or Leadership Camp graduate, Matthew Shen Goodman. He will introduce the artist and the background of this event and the schedule for the next hour and a half. So Matthew, if you would like to take over now, that would be great. And thank you, Matthew, again, very, very much for joining us or us joining you in this wonderful presentation that I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Yeah, so as Jane said, my name is Matthew Shen Goodman. I'm a senior editor at Triple Canopy, and we're co-hosting with Asia Art Archive in America today's virtual screening, Miasma, Plants, Export Paintings, which is a screening of recent works by Bo Wang. The works deal with colonial-era exchanges between the United States, Britain, and China, and contrast them to contemporary scenes of international commerce as characterized by industrial ports and special economic zones. With an eye to the reverberations of these historical encounters in the present, Bo's asking how people understand themselves and others, the circulation of goods, the filming of fictions, and the invention of systems to contain and categorize the wares, tales, and peoples of foreign nations. Yeah, so, this is, if you don't, just very quickly, this is being presented as part of the currently publishing issue, Triple Canopy, called Unknown States. Triple Canopy is a magazine. We're based in New York. We have a website at canopy.com. And the issue Unknown States is asking kind of how do fictions give rise to nations and nationalities, and how do those fictions work and for whom? So you can see more at our website. And actually, for those in New York, just a brief plug, we'll be doing another set of screenings, these in person at BAM from February 11th to the 15th about Brazilian modernism. And it's going to be programmed by translator and writer Katrina Dotson. Yeah, so Bo is, to give a brief biography, Bo is a wonderful artist, filmmaker, and researcher based in the Netherlands. His works have been exhibited internationally, including venues like Guggenheim Museum and MoMA, Garage Museum Moscow, International Film Festival Rotterdam, the Image Forum Festival Tokyo, and various other places. And he's currently joining us from Amsterdam, where he's a PhD candidate at the Amsterdam School of Cultural Analysis at the University of Amsterdam. And yeah, I guess the way this will work is that Bo's going to introduce each of the selections being screened, and afterwards I'll lead a short conversation around 15 minutes, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the audience. You can enter those questions essentially anytime you'd like during the Zoom screening. There's a little button for Q&A. It should be at the bottom of your Zoom interface thing. And there's also closed captioning that's available for the introductions and the discussions. So that's also, I think you have to opt in and turn it on, but if that's something that you're looking for, it should be there as well. But yeah, with that, just want to say thanks again to Asia Art Archive and to Jane and Hillary and Fu Ren as well, and to Bo, of course, for allowing us to do the screening. And I'll let you introduce the things.
All right, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jen. Thanks for everyone for being here. And especially thanks to Asian Art Archive and Triple Canopy to organize this, virtual screening event. And so today we're going to show 3 works, but I would like to maybe give a brief introduction before each work. And so the first one we're going to see is Miasma plant export painting, which is initially conceived as a 2-channel video installation and commissioned by the Shenzhen, Hong Kong Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture back in 2017. So this work, as Matthew pointed out, it's a work that examines the dynamic relationship between colonial expansion, scientific knowledge, racism, and anchored in this context of 19th century Canton. And this work also has been exhibited both in film festivals, but also as a video installation and in different kind of biennales, and exhibited together with different kind of artifacts and objects. I think I should not say too much about the work, but let's come back to discuss afterwards. So thank you. So the next work you're going to see is a very short work, initially commissioned by Triple Canopy back in 2019. This commission was an invitation to create a work as a part of exhibition that was supposed to take place at the Risti Museum. In Risti Museum, there was this gallery called the Pendleton House, which was, I believe, was the first museum gallery dedicated for American decorative art. Within the gallery, there's a large collection of objects from 19th century Canton. So this work was conceived to be physically exhibited in the Pendleton House as a way to create a dialogue between the American history on display and the role of Canton in the early colonial time of America. So please enjoy. So the third part of the screening will be an excerpt from the 1986 American film Tai-Pan. And in Miasma Plants Expanding, I think you already saw some of the footage I recycled from this film. But I would like to, in this screening session, I would like to show some edited excerpts from this film again. And I also would like to very much highlight the notion of gaze in this film, which will lead to some further discussion between me and Matthew about the notion of visuality in the colonial time.
All right, well, thanks so much, Bo. I guess I wanted to start by maybe talking about the Miasma plants and export paintings video, just because, and just to give a little more context about the project of the RISD Museum is Triple Canopy, way back before the pandemic, was asked by the RISD Museum to work on a project called they had an exhibition called Raid the Icebox Now, which involved various artists and kind of groups like looking at different wings of the museum and kind of doing things with the collection. And so they gave us the Pendleton House, which, as you said, is it's essentially like a old-timey New England house that's built into the museum itself. And it's based off of the house and contains it's like based off the house and kind of contains the collection of Charles Pendleton. It was built in 1906. And like you said, it was the first museum of American decorative arts, which he was really into because he thought it demonstrated like American technical prowess and kind of aesthetic refinement. But also there was, as we discovered, a great deal of like Chinese, mostly ceramics, but just kind of like various like products made for export at the time, which were like a really big deal in kind of colonial America for like, essentially as a way of Americans to show that they could also consume and own like Chinese products and were like as fashionable and refined as others kind of in Europe and in the West, because China then, as is now, it was like kind of viewed as this industrial powerhouse. And there's a really incredible book about this called Objectifying China, Imagining America, which I recommend. In any case, I'll say that, yeah, we came across the film, the Miasma Plants Export Paintings. We were really excited because, you know, there's this shared focus on the commodity trade that gave rise to these American impressions of China, which, to be honest, like weren't really based on anything besides like these ceramic bowls or whatever they were getting, right? Because of the Canton system, they were kind of only allowed to like kind of circulate around those 13 factories or whatever. And like, so the rest of it was them just kind of looking at these ceramics that honestly were pretty poor quality. There was, I think, like a Qing era edict that was essentially like anything that was like high quality and had like sort of the stamp of approval couldn't be exported out. So the stuff that we were getting in the US, even though we were like, this is so exciting, this stuff is so wonderful, was actually pretty shitty, which is kind of funny. But in any case, we're really excited about your film as like a way of like looking also, I think, on the Chinese side of it, and, you know, connecting it too with parallels to the contemporary moment. And, you know, you have all this wonderful footage of like Shenzhen and other, you know, areas like Hong Kong, southern China generally, and kind of the manufacturing special economic zones that have happened, you know, for the past couple of decades. And so I guess I wanted to start with like a very simple question, just kind of how you came to the subject and like kind of what piqued your interest. And for the Miasma Plants Export Paintings, because you're drawing so many parallel lines, right? And just kind of curious about like the research process that went into creating it. It's very broad, but, you know, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, so basically, I forgot to mention earlier, but in the credit, you can already see Miasma Plants Export Painting was a collaboration between me and my longtime collaborator, Pan Lui, who's based in Hong Kong. And so since 2012, we have been discussing about working together on a major film project about the spatial politics in Hong Kong, and how basically the forum space in Hong Kong has helped to shape the social crisis. This film was a very long research process, and very soon we realized that to deal with the notion of the concept of space in Hong Kong, it's inevitably you have to take consideration of the colonial history, which laid the foundation for the urban, different kind of principles of urban plan, but also the early history of colonial scientific research, particularly the notion of climate, the notion of miasma, how to keep hygiene practice, how to separate different ethnic communities. And so while doing the research process, we ended up also reading a lot about the early plants hunter and naturalists the British sent to the East Asia. And surprisingly, this also connected with both of us interest in export painting, because the export painting was I think in the major art history sort of narrative of Chinese art. Expert painting was actually outside of the main discussion because first of all, most of the artists who create expert paintings were not trained in the traditional canons of Chinese traditional painting, because as you can also probably saw in the film, many of the artists who make expert paintings, they were not necessarily artists by training. Some of them were merchants, some were peasants. Was due to the demand of this kind of drawings, so they become artists. And also the way of the drawing also have to convey certain kind of realistic purpose, so that the drawing can be used for archival, for kind of scientific study purposes. So lots of the artistic styles does not necessarily have anything to do with the traditional Chinese art, way of making paintings and drawings. And it's a subject that I think it's somehow understudied, but also and looking at the visual style, this kind of certain kind of elements, how they distort the perspectives, it's just fascinating. And then we very soon realize actually this rise of the expert painting industry is very closely related with the scientific expedition of the Western countries. So that get us very excited. So in this work, we try to weave together all these actors in 19th century Canton, and to show the complicated relationship between colonial interaction and also cultural exchange.
Mm-hmm. Actually, we have a question from someone in the audience that I think is useful to answer now. Maybe it's that wondering about the archival sources and the research process that you had, and if you don't mind talking a bit about where you sourced the images, especially the historical photos, which I was also noticed, especially I think in that sequence I was really struck when you're talking about the pandemic and sort of the English-led response to the pandemic in Hong Kong during, I forget the year, it was
1894.
1894. Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. And actually, lots of the images, especially the photographies, were from the an image archive called the Wellcome Archive, which is a London-based image archive. And I don't know if they have changed their policy of copyright. So while we are working on this project, they actually have lots of images, including photography work from John Thompson, which was which is often considered as the first Western photographer came to China to document landscape, people. And back then, lots of John Thompson's work, including his negatives, the original scan of his negatives, were all available. And it's also, I think, the copyright is sort of free as long as you credit Wellcome Archive. So I think the archive itself is very much dedicated to, and also has a very, I would not say dedicated to, but they have a huge interest in medical photos, medical images from 17th to 19th century until like 20th century. So it was a huge, I think it was huge, very important resource for our research. And then there are lots of expert painting work, which we found in different sources. I think there's lots of publications available, but I think the largest collection of expert paintings actually is in Peabody Museum in Massachusetts.
Okay, interesting.
So somehow like this relationship between New England, the Northeast America, and Canton is deeply connected.
Oh, that's fun. I mean, I think wait, the Peabody at Yale, or is it not at Yale?
No, I think it's Peabody. Wait, let me see. You do Peabody.
Or the one in Salem. The Peabody Essex Museum. Yeah.
Peabody Essex Museum. Yes. Exactly.
Yale has that collection of the Lam Qua, those oil paintings of people with like various medical.
Yeah, Lingguan's portraits. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
that was in Yale, but there's huge collection in Peabody Essex
Okay.
in Thailand.
And the Wellcome Museum it's WELLCOME. Just, I mean the collection you were talking about.
I think it might be double L. I'm
Okay.
not sure. Maybe double L. If you search
So
Wellcome, it's based in London. Lots of images of medical and plants stuff, I think. Yeah, it's double L.
yeah, and so I guess I'm curious because you mentioned the sort of the history of this or this particular history of Chinese painting, and I was thinking a lot watching the film too about, I feel like in contemporary art or like Western contemporary art circles, there was like a boom of interest in this like a decade ago or so with like the Shanzai stuff or like the questions about forgery, etc. And I was curious to hear your thoughts, not only about like, you know, because like I think you're drawing these parallels to the contemporary production of, you know, items and wares and commodities too, but also of images themselves. And you have that scene where it's in, I'm not sure if it's like a printing studio or some such, but they're sort of printing the image of the 13 factories from the original sort of Canton system. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about like what your research showed you about like contemporary image production in China and in those situations, but also like I guess like the, you know, the parallels that you're obviously drawing.
Yeah. So maybe I'll give a little bit more information about a little bit context about this particular village near Shenzhen called Dafeng Village. So I mean, right now I think if you are in the art world, everyone is pretty much familiar with the concept of Shanzai, of this kind of Chinese replica. But so Dafeng Village was a small village in the outskirts of Shenzhen, in the north of Shenzhen, and I think back in the 90s. The local party secretary, and I believe it's the guy who's the party secretary, he decided to kind of sort of reorganize this village into a sort of art production village. So the villagers were organized to be trained to mass replicate, to produce mass replicas of the classic paintings, particularly from the West. Lots of Mona Lisa, lots of Van Gogh, lots of Picasso work were produced. And the purpose of the production was not to take over the original, but in a way to make affordable copies so that can circulate in the sort of decoration market. So it's not meant to be produced as artwork and with any kind of authorship. And I would not say the Dafeng Village is 100 some kilometers away from Canton, which is not exactly the same location. But I think and it's also a very kind of an economic reform phenomenon. But I think for me, I would like to see the Dafeng Village as sort of kind of reincarnation of the 13th factory art studios back in the early 18th century, 19th century, sorry. And so in this film, there's actually one thing you see. We have this one local artist in Dafeng Village who is basically replicate a painting which was from the 13th factory era, made by 13th factory artist. So I think basically we hire him as a contemporary art worker to recreate this painting from this painting with anonymous author from almost 200 years ago, as a gesture. And one very interesting anecdote was, because this idea about Shenzhen is a city, as everyone knows, it's like known for its efficiency, known for representing fast, being practical, being very pragmatic. So while I asked him to recreate this painting, he actually the first question he asked me was not about the price, was about how to do it, because he suggested if there's two options. First of all, and he can make the sketch with his own pencil and apply the pen from scratch, or the other way, and he can print this digital print, the image, onto the canvas, and with a very desaturated kind of color.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
then he applied his pen on top of it, which will save some time, will also look exactly the same. So I accept the proposal. I think it's a very interesting modern interpretation.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I found very extremely interesting is also about authorship, because if you look into the extra paintings in 19th century, and lots of the, and of course there's some kind of author names, but they are always in a kind of very peculiar name, and that in other Chinese speakers sometimes it doesn't make sense. So lots of people Lingguan or Tingguan, like those kind of names that you don't know what does really means. So lots of scholars argue actually, and the extra paintings back in 13th factory in Canton was produced in almost assembly line. So a whole studio will have maybe one major artist, but several apprentices, and everyone work on several parts of the painting. So the painting was collectively created. And then by then, and the signature of the painting was not under any particular artist's name, was actually under the studio name. And so while we commissioned this gentleman to recreate this painting, and I also asked him very vaguely to sign, and after the work was finished, but I didn't give any indication. Okay, are you supposed to sign your own name or something else? So it turns out he also signs. He only signed his studio name without mentioning himself at all.
Oh, that's very funny.
Yeah. So there's some kind of logic, I think, that that somehow reincarnated.
No, yeah, no, that's very funny. I'm actually reminded that there's I'll drop a link to this in the chat for everyone to see, but there is a very early, actually the first issue of Triple Canopy had an essay by William Smith, who was a founding editor who worked at Art in America and is now working for M+ in Hong Kong, actually. But it's about sort of that village and these. But yeah, it's and I think he had a similar experience talking to like one of these studios where he's like, well, can you tell me a little bit about the person who's like making the painting? They're kind of like, yeah, sure, if you want. Like it doesn't, I don't think it matters that much to him, but yeah, we're happy to. But it's very, it's kind of funny. Yeah, I guess, you know, to move then to the short, the Empress of China short that was made originally for the Rizy exhibition, which we should say like didn't come about because of like essentially the exhibition opened during the pandemic and a lot of things sort of got held up. So I appreciate, but Bo's been very patient with Triple Canopy for a while now. It's great we can finally do this. But you know, I think that one's really interesting for me because it's, I mean, first of all, I'm very sad that I couldn't see it with, like in this old New England house, like surrounded by Chinese ceramics. But it's kind of interesting because like the other films that you've made, you're quite prolific, and a lot of your films kind of have, at least from what I can tell, kind of documentarian essay, kind of slightly lyrical, but like essayistic quality. It's mostly non-fiction, and this one is kind of more like a speculative, like historical fiction / satire a little bit. And so I guess I was also curious, you know, and it's less straightforward in the sense of like presenting like a history that you want people to read and see, and more kind of playing with presumptions, but also with like, you know, serious historical research. And like the Empress of China, for people who don't know, was the first American trading ship, right? That they got to go to sort of to China after the US became its own country. And so I guess I was curious about both the research that went into this particular piece, but also it also seems like you're and we've talked about how you're sort of satirizing certain forms, and including like the news form itself, and like there's a sort of there's a tendency in American newscasters to like have the visiting Chinatown piece, and so I thought it'd be great if you could speak a little bit about
that. Yeah. So I mean, first of all, this work was born in our conversation. So I think it was summer 2019. I think it was July, and so Matthew wrote me.
Yeah, it was a long time
and,
ago.
yeah, just mentioned about this idea, and then back then I was also happened to read something about the early Americans in Canton during the old Canton system period, and yeah, I think like one thing that really fascinated me was how these two nations, China and the US, has so much things that's entangled back in like 200 years ago. I mean, like I think the majority now, of course, there's lots of talk about like Sino-US relations, about trade war, this and that. I think the majority of the narrative, what people are stick with, are always about like almost always started from 20th century. This like Second World War, like their allies, and then the Korean War, they become rivals. And the Cultural Revolution, the ping pong diplomacy, and the trade war. Deng Xiaoping invaded the US in the 80s. So it's very contemporary. And also this, I think like it's always this encounter between the two nations has always been portrayed as, like this encounter between America, which is a very new, modern, democratic, liberal country that, a developed country, that encounter with China, which was, was the empire, had a golden past, but in the modernization process has been left behind, lots of backwardness, underdevelopment, and also, but of course, due to like new economic reform, different kind of efforts, has become almost like one of the most important economic entities nowadays in the world. So like this kind of the narrative of the encounter is very anchored in this kind of 20th century modern setting. But I think by reading lots of the books about the Canton system, how it's significant to the early American wealth accumulation, I realized actually there are lots of things entangled from the beginning. I mean, basically, Empress of China, and the reason why it was traveling to China was because right after America was founded, there was British sanction over America. So America could not treat with any other countries that has sort of relationship with UK, with the British. So they're looking for overseas partners, and China was this kind of very imaginary name of prosperity, of goods that basically can make a profit out of it. And luckily, Empress of China made it to China, to Canton. So and then I mean, lots of the the work is, I think it's totally, lots of script can be seen as very ridiculous, but many of the things the anchor person was saying is actually pretty much true. Like all the major families in 19th century, they all somehow, I mean, large percentage of them did get their early wealth accumulation from Canton trade. And so how that sort of fantasy to China, that kind of also the actual economic benefit through the Canton tree and was very essential to American early development. I think, and I was totally fascinated by that. And but then also think about this idea about how the transformation of the image of China. I mean, for this, I might need to go back a little bit to Miasma, plants and export painting. I think Miasma, plants and export painting in this work, we sort of frame the time span of the work in the early to middle 19th century, which we compare the aesthetics and the reception, the popularity of export painting in the West, and with with photography. Basically, you see somehow during the early, the high days of the export paintings, there was still some kind of leftover of fantasy, of certain kind of imagination or fantasy towards Chinese goods. This kind of curiosity, this kind of but anyway, but compared to photography, which after photography was brought to China through this kind of mechanical eye, this kind of very modern technology, what the camera actually did was sort of reinforce a certain kind of narrative that somehow the world is divided into a world of the modern versus the pre-modern, the developed, the civil and the uncivilized. And so I think, first of all, in Miasma plants and export painting, we are both very interested in the role of visuality in the construction of the world. Like Mikolas Mirzov used to point it out, the visuality is a way of world making. So in Miasma plants and export painting, we also want to kind of examine how the visuality from export painting and from photography has helped to transform the idea about Chinese or Asiatics in the Western discourse. But back to the second work, I think there's also lots of references, like you brought up, to this sort of American TV reporting. I mean, we're very familiar with this kind of reporting Chinatown kind of style, like going to China, a white person, TV person, go to Chinatown, first the B-roll with the wet market, some shrimps, some fish, and then just talking to some random person who doesn't necessarily speak English. And so there's lots of reference towards that.
I want to there's two questions. I wanted to go back to what you said quickly about visuality and just ask about that in reference to the Tai-Pan selections, because it seems like that sort of world make. I mean, at the very end, right? There's literal world making. He's like looking, and then suddenly it becomes the Hong Kong of modern day. Actually, I found something really funny because I was reading a New York Times article about the movie, and I guess originally they had hoped to run the title sequence at the beginning over shots of modern Hong Kong waterfront, and then the Chinese government vetoed it because they didn't want to imply that like these sort of opium traders had done great things. But yet, it's the message. I don't know. The narrative is still there. It's just at the very end, and so with that sort of blurry cut. But yeah, I guess if you want to speak about the gaze and world making within reference to the excerpts that you selected, that'd be great.
Yeah, because I think like one thing I would like also point out at the beginning of the beginning thing. So basically, I think at the beginning thing I almost didn't cut anything. I just like dragged the whole beginning. So this idea of like who are the local, who are the aliens arrival. I think that was very interesting. Somehow like Canton was depicted as this kind of European settlement. So you see this kind of very prosperous ongoing business going on between the British, the Western Europeans, and the locals. They are very busy with making money, like carrying the cargo, like goods, whatever. And then the imperial ship arrives. So almost like the imperial ship is the alien who sort of invaded Canton and to interrupt the harmonious organic order of the international trading port. And then also what's interesting, I think also the way when the encounter happens, when the imperial ship passing by, you can see almost everyone from 13 factories, doesn't matter was the Europeans or the Chinese, they all have their eyes responding to the ships. But then you have the camera cuts to the other side on the imperial ships. It was only the head of the cruise, like the high official, looking. All the other people almost like robots. They're kind of looking forward.
They're rowing or they're like drumming,
drumming and making music, but also without any turning their head at all. Whatever is going on, I think that kind of relationship through the gaze was extremely fascinating. And of course, by the end, you see like how this montage really implies how Hong Kong from a kind of this kind of trading port, this kind of island nobody wanted, its transformation to this kind of global city was basically due to the magic of the white man's gaze.
It's so literal. It's like it's a very I think I'd only seen the selections that are in the miasma, like that are integrated into miasma. And so when I saw that ending, I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have 2 questions from the Q&A, and I think maybe we'll answer those, and then we can end the event. But so someone is curious about your approach to audio in your works, as well as the question, and I guess this kind of has to do too with the short that you produced for Triple Canopy, of whether you find yourself imagining into the gaps into the archive, or kind of exploring fictions, like sort of fictionalization as a way of, I guess.
Okay, let me see my question. What would you talk about his audio in his work? Okay, so there's 2 questions basically. First about approach to audio, and second of all, myself imagining into the gap in the archive of exploring fictions. So yeah, I think I don't fully understand the question. I mean, okay, so, and the second one, do I ever find myself imagining into the gaps into the archive, exploring fictions? I would say any kind of reading of archive is always fiction. I think like an archive with, I don't necessarily see the exploration of archive as sort of, yes, it is sort of a process to looking for reality, but at the same time, there might be, multiple realities. Also, like, depends on the way how I think images always has a very, ambiguous way to different ways of shifting ground to read into images. So also how our relationship with historical reality and through mediated by the archive, I think it's always questionable. So I would say, and I think the usage of archive, this research in archive, is also definitely connected with speculative thinkings about fictionalized and historical past. And then my approach to audio, I don't fully understand what exactly this question was about. If
I think, I mean, well, I do think the audio in your film's pretty striking, but, and I don't know if that's just because it seems like you work with someone else in terms of like scoring and so on, and I don't know if it's simply a matter of that, of like, working with someone in a typical way, but I guess if it's fairly simple, then it's just, like
yeah, no, for me, I think like first of all, lots of my audiovisual work, and very much fall into the category, if we can call it essay film or essay video. So lots of interplay between images, voiceover, text, and audio. And so I always see audio and language and images they should sort of form a certain kind of dynamic relation with each other. And sometimes, so I try to avoid using any one of those to illustrate the other. So it's more about how to create tension, how to create even conflicts between those different kind of elements. And so in terms of audio, I like, apparently, I think you can tell, I like very corny and cheesy and pop songs that you record from the field, in the field. But also sometimes I also would like to use noises and funk sound to a certain way to create different experiences. Yeah, I don't know if that answered the question.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I do think, especially with the voiceover, there is so much interplay, right? And then I think the final question is how you're thinking about, if you're thinking about the sort of parallels between the epidemics that you're chronicling in Miasma, and then the film, and the Western response then, and then sort of COVID and the production, I imagine too, the productions of images of China and the circulation thereof in relation to like the idea of something miasmatic in terms of certain people's understandings of the pandemic, especially early on, because it feels very, it speaks obviously to the moment without speaking explicitly about COVID, given that the film was made a few years before.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes
Yeah,
I should say sometimes you're just lucky and you make something that speaks to the moment like shortly thereafter. But I'm sure you've had moments to think about this a little bit.
Well, I mean, this is I mean, the whole pandemic experience for me was also very intense, and also didn't expect, you know, how now the topic of pandemics become such overwhelming issue for everyone. But back then, I think I think there's a few inspirations I got, almost few spot of other events that get me really into the topic of pandemics or diseases in general. I mean, particularly during the colonial time. First of all, like I think many years ago, I first encountered the painting of Lin Guan, like the one you mentioned. Like this is probably like the first Chinese artist who work with oil painting, like in Western oil painting. But he's known for his thanks for the link. Known for this most of the work that is preserved now is oil painting. Many of them in this kind of very classic Rembrandt lighting kind of composition, classic composition, but of people with distorted bodies, of you know, like and apparently it's oil painting, but for you can imagine for medical purposes. Yeah, I think when I first encountered that, I mean, also Lin Guan's work was considered as the almost earliest Chinese oil painting work we can find. Somehow that that kind of strangeness of this kind of painting really strike me. And then there's also I think in 2013 I saw an exhibition in Hong Kong and at Parasite and the Journal of the Plague Year, which also was very good exhibition. Also like the many artists and also writers contributed to the topic of pandemics, because Hong Kong, I mean, historically and went through lots of pandemics, and you know, and the 1894, which was mentioned in the film, and also the 2003 SARS, and even before that, you know, and I think in 1967, 66, there was also a huge pandemics, and so lots of issues about pandemics, how the society experience, how individual experience the notion of time, the kind of transformation of space. I think you know, so this film Miasma Plants Exopainting was sort of natural, was very naturally linked to the notion of pandemics. And now I don't know how, I mean, how to respond to the question of how 19th century pandemics are now. I mean, apparently we see lots of this sort of especially at the beginning of the pandemics, and I think at early beginning of 2020, 2 years ago, there was also xenophobia going on, and this idea of associating Chinese or Asians in general with as the source or the carrier of diseases. That feels, I mean, to me also, it's very much what we discuss about in the film, and which address the issue in 19th century, and somehow it's always there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's looking at these things, you see how these dynamics reoccur, right? And so, you know, you see how the sort of American obsession with China as sort of a place of refinement, but also unknowable, but also sort of feminized, but also the sort of mighty industrial powerhouse of like to be feared recurs. You see this sort of fascination with Chinese bodies, you know, like given those paintings, but also sort of, you know, abhorrence on the basis in terms of ideas of like plague and the spread thereof, and you know,
but this is also something I want to also bring up, because I think also this idea and how we see China, even nowadays, you know, like we see like we discussed how lots of this kind of old notion, 19th century notion of China being this kind of you know, backwards country, people being the sort of you know, carrier of diseases. It actually has some kind of traces from Enlightenment, I would say, and also has basically, maybe, I mean, in Miasma plants exopainting, we compare exopainting to photography. But if we flash back further, we trace back further of this kind of fantasy towards Chinese and goods, Chinese objects. Everyone, I think, probably know the term Xinhua theory, this idea about obsession of Chinese aesthetics, but projected on objects which were sort of not necessarily originally from China or Japan, but it's more kind of Western imitation of a Chinese or Japanese object, which back in 18th century was extremely popular, but also particularly among the European ruling class. So actually, before Empress of China arrived in Canton, this kind of Xinhua theory or Chinese good has already arrived in America. But somehow, this, like, when Enlightenment started, like, you can see that the concept, the image of China has also started to transform. I think Montesquieu was the first Western intellectual to label China as empire of despotism. Somehow, because also, like, Enlightenment, like this idea of Enlightenment is also sort of there's also a kind of backlash towards the ruling class, the royal class, basically. And so this kind of royal class of obsession on Xinhua theory has sort of leads to this fact that Xinhua theory, these Chinese goods, are always seen as conservative, feminine, frail in nature. And so in a way, I think this kind of portrayal of China, I mean, in 19th century particularly, and during this kind of industrial revolution period, this kind of portrayal of China as a feminine, mysterious, despotic, is actually a product of the Enlightenment looking for a perfect mirrored other.
Yeah, no, and also maybe like trying to assess China's progress while also viewing it as perhaps a step along the way to a kind of westernized enlightenment. And you have that too in like Hegel, in the philosophy of history, kind of has these bits about like China being, the realm of like theocratic despotism, but also where history begins itself. And so it's kind of, China's advanced, but not quite as advanced but also like a source of deep unease, be it because of economic or political contestation, or to go back to the question itself that was raised, like these specter of disease that's constantly. Yeah, I think maybe that's a good place to end. I'd like to thank Bo, of course, for joining us and allowing us to screen his wonderful films, and also to Jane and Furen and Hillary at Asia Archive. Hi, Jane. Sorry, she popped on screen for a second for me. But yeah, and thanks to everyone for joining, and please continue to support both organizations. This was really great having you all.
Thank you.
Bye.